Hello there. Welcome into a Wednesday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the Extra Sports 1300 app to do your listening in that fine piece of technology that is 100% free to use, free to download, sponsored by Diversus Health, Mental Health, and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you. And I'd love to get your thoughts. I'll give you my thoughts and you give me yours. How about that? 719-247-1313. You could call or text them into the show. Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera will be my guest to talk Buffs as they get ready to open this season Friday against Georgia Tech. He'll join me in the next segment. But let's start with the Denver Broncos, and the final roster cutdowns happened, and there is, I think it's starting to get a little bit out of control here with, the culture in Denver better than it has been in years past. You have a coach with the Denver Broncos that guys want to play for, but it's getting a little bit much about how this depth that the Broncos have accumulated and how they are somehow the envy of every other team in the league. So Sean Payton, first of all, he's talking about Frank Crum. Okay, depth offensive lineman. They kept him, and the reason they kept him, well, Sean Payton's going to get into it right now, but just take a listen.
Man, just the athleticism. He's been a player. We've had three teams call on him, and it's the upside and the size and the athleticism, his feet, his protection. Like, we have a clear and a really good vision for what we think he can become. And that ceiling is high. And so, and you can tell there are other teams doing their homework the same way.
Okay. Which is fine. It's not to say that other teams aren't interested in players on the Denver Broncos, but if they want to keep them because they believe the ceiling is high, that's fine. But then you also go back to the trade of Devon Vele and say, well, they were willing to give up Devon Vele perhaps because they didn't think the ceiling was super high on Devon Vele. Right? I mean, isn't that reasonable to say if other teams are calling about Frank Crum, as other teams were about Devon Vele, but the difference, the Broncos deciding to trade Vele and not Frank Crum, has to do with how they view Devon Vele's ceiling and how low that could be. But then he gets into the big, I don't want to say shocker, but the surprise, I think, of roster cutdowns, and that was that Kareem Reed was chosen over LaVale Bailey, and here's Sean Payton talking about those two players, and once again, acting as if he got one over on the rest of the league.
So we saw, man, a draftable player. It's interesting because both with Reed and Bailey, they were on the phone, heading somewhere, 6 teams, and I would say identically an hour and a half with me, emailing them information relative to free agent guys that make rosters. Everyone can say, hey, free agents have a great shot at making our team, and yet we had a history. Our scouts did a great job of putting together 17 years 18, 19 years with me as a head coach. And then getting that information. So the process with those two players, I felt like was almost identical. You know, I can't recall the teams, but we flipped them.
I mean, this has been a running theme of the Sean Payton era in Denver. That Sean Payton and you think of how he claims that they manipulated the entire draft so they could land Bo Nix and all this kind of stuff. And is all this really that necessary? You know, to be and you know, everyone eats it up. You know, the people eat it up that, you know, Sean Payton is able to flip guys. And here's the best one, Sam Ehlinger. Right? Sam Ehlinger is being reported that he will join the Broncos practice squad despite having opportunities to be on other teams' 53-man rosters. And if I just said that, as the reports are out there saying, you go, wow, Sam Ehlinger would rather be a practice squad player with the Denver Broncos than be on a 53-man roster of another team. What a ringing endorsement of what the Denver Broncos have building. Except when you dive more into it, the 53-man roster spots that Sam Ehlinger was being offered were for the same job description as he has in Denver. Sam Ehlinger was not turning down backup quarterback gigs or starting quarterback gigs to be the practice squad quarterback for the Denver Broncos. He's passing up opportunities to be QB3 on another team versus being QB3 on the Denver Broncos. That's essentially what it is. And I understand there's probably compensation that goes into it. I'm not trying to say that it's not an endorsement to a certain extent of Sean Payton, especially when you talk about quarterbacks, right? We've seen what he's done with Teddy Bridgewater. We saw what he did with Taysom Hill, who's not even really a quarterback. So yeah, if I'm a quarterback and it's apples to apples and I'm being offered to be the QB3 on the Cleveland Browns or the QB3 on the Denver Broncos, yeah, I would probably rather be the QB3 on the Denver Broncos. Like Sean Payton, I know it hasn't been there in Denver for so long that it seems like this foreign concept that other teams just don't have. There are other teams that are getting guys to join their teams or stay with their teams because of what they are building. And that hasn't been the case with the Denver Broncos for a long time. But I just feel like after these roster cutdowns, it's just gotten out of control. The idea that Sean Payton's getting over on everyone else on the league and Frank Crum is this hidden gem that these other teams are trying. Well, I guess not even hidden. He's this gem that other teams are trying to get, and the Broncos won't let him go. Like the PR machine that Sean Payton leads, it's quite impressive. And he has people in the national media that push this agenda, and he pushes it himself. And you know what? To be fair, if you're not going to pat yourself on the back, if you're not going to beat your own chest, then nobody's going to say anything on your behalf. But it just goes back to the depth conversation that we've been having. Like, yes, it's nice, and I'm sure that the Broncos have great depth, but ultimately, are you going to care about, with all due respect, Frank Crum, Kareem Reed, are these players that you think are going to be consequential to the Denver Broncos' success this season? No. But it's a dead period between roster cutdowns and the start of the season story. Oh, wow, there are a few guys that other teams wanted that the Broncos wouldn't trade. And oh wow, a guy maybe turned down a few more bucks to stay with the Denver Broncos. That's all nice. But eventually we need to turn the page to what's actually going to help the Denver Broncos win games. And the players that we're talking about over the last couple of days aren't going to do that. So we'll see in the coming years what Frank Crum becomes on the Denver Broncos. And I thought Kareem Reed was a great story, and I thought Kareem Reed was a great message that Sean Payton was sending to his team, like, hey, if you come out and you play well in these preseason games, you're going to get a spot. But it's always story time with Sean Payton, and he goes into the Chase Daniel story. Like he's just still in year 3 selling the program. I think that's what ultimately this is. This is Sean Payton continuing to sell the program that he has with the Denver Broncos. And there's not anything inherently wrong with it. I just think that people take it a bit too far and have over the last 24 hours. But that's what he's doing. He's selling it. Hey, if you're an undrafted guy, you have a better chance to play for us than you do other teams. And he talks about how he's able to flip guys and how other teams want his players and how they fleece the New Orleans Saints in getting a 4th-round pick for Devon Vele. Like this, a lot of this is true, and a lot of this reflects well on Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos. But just sometimes it goes a little, the selling of the program goes a little bit too far. And maybe Sean Payton has to do this because, as I mentioned before, the Denver Broncos have had a reputation of being a little bit cold when it comes to their, in fact, Javonte Williams. Surprisingly, Javonte Williams, did you see him in Dallas the other day talking about how Dallas is a better family atmosphere? It's a tighter-knit group than what he had in Denver, which is interesting because it's counter to all this other stuff that's being put out locally. But look, you can dismiss what Javonte Williams said, because he got let go by the Denver Broncos, essentially. That's fine. But I do know that the Broncos for a long time had a reputation of not taking care of their guys, a little bit, bottom line oriented and making some harsh decisions. And now Sean Payton comes in understanding that, and you see the extensions that the Broncos have given out, and you hear Sean Payton continuing to tout the program. Yes, the Denver Broncos are making progress. They're in a better spot than they have been in previous years. And yes, Sean Payton should be on a short list of coaches you want to play for. If you want to be good at what you do and you want to win, it's a good place to be. It's just, let's pump the brakes here a little bit on the Broncos are getting one over on everybody else. Because we're talking about 4th and 5th guys on depth charts, not ones that are going to impact winning this season. But we now turn the page, right? We're all looking for stuff to talk about right now because we're desperately waiting for NFL season to begin. And this is what we fill our time with. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, let's talk about actual football on the field, which will occur Friday night in Boulder as CU hosts Georgia Tech. Have Brian Howell, Boulder Daily Camera, buffzone.com to join me. Just how much of a no-brainer was it to start Caden Salter, and just how good can he be coming over from Liberty? We'll talk with Brian about that next on Extra Sports 1300. College football for us here in Colorado really starts this week. CSU, CU, Air Force all in action this weekend. First up, the Buffs taking on Georgia Tech, and some very interesting things said by Deion Sanders yesterday, which is not it happens a lot that Deion Sanders will, and I said this yesterday, that I was curious to see if Deion would tone down some of the rhetoric, and I was, I guess, not totally surprised to find out that he didn't. Joining me now to discuss what Deion had to say yesterday in this season opener. You know him very well because he's the best covering the Buffs. He is Brian Howell from the Boulder Daily Camera and Buff Zone. Brian, pleasure to have you. How are you been?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just excited for this season. I'm really intrigued by this season. I don't know how high my expectations are for the Buffs, but my interest level in this season is probably not as high as when Deion first arrived, but pretty high for this Buffs team. How about you?
Yeah, I think there's you're right. It's interesting because you don't have the superstars. I mean, the last 2 years they've had, whether you want to consider Travis and Shedeur the two best players in college football, they were certainly the most recognizable players in college football last year. They don't have that. I mean, they talked to some of my colleagues this summer. Well, who's the face of this team? Well, it's probably your left tackle and what is now your backup quarterback. Those are probably the two faces of your team. So that's not the same as Shedeur and Travis. But I think there's a lot of intrigue because, what does this look like without Travis? What does this look like without Shedeur? Coach Prime has never coached a game without Shedeur Sanders as his quarterback. So that's kind of interesting. And so I think there's a lot of intrigue. I think if people tune in, it's going to be because they want to see, can Deion do this without his son and without Travis?
Was naming Caden Salter the starting quarterback as much as of a no-brainer as Deion made it seem like yesterday?
Well, yeah, it was kind of funny how he said it because
right.
He's like, well, I don't know why you guys were, I was like, well, because you kept saying and you kept putting the two of them up there together at the podium, and you kept saying this is very much competition. But for anybody, I don't know how well other people dove into the well-off media videos like I have over the last month, but like when you watch those, it was pretty obvious to me. I mean, you go into camp and you're like, okay, maybe this is a real competition, but you watch the well-off media videos of every practice, and it's like I could count on one hand the number of plays I saw Julian Lewis playing with the first-team offensive line, and there was 0 times I saw Caden Salter playing without the first-team offensive line. So it seemed pretty obvious to me in watching all that. And I know they can edit stuff out, but I'm like, it seems pretty obvious to me when Caden Salter's taking 98% of the plays, seemingly just on well-off with the first-team offense, that he's probably the guy.
Mm-hmm. Brian Howell, buffzone.com, joining me here on Drive Time Sports. So what's the thing that Caden Salter does best?
Well, he's old compared to Julian Lewis, so that's a good thing. That might be the biggest difference between the two is that, I mean, look, Caden Salter's 22 years old. Julian Lewis is 17. That's a pretty big gap when it comes to college football. Now, where Julian's going to turn 18 in about 3 weeks, but still, that's a big gap. I mean, I think Caden was Caden was in high school when Julian was like in 5th grade or something like that. So, I mean, it's there's a big gap between the two. And so I think that number one is huge. I mean, he's got 30 starts under his belt and Julian doesn't have any. And so the other thing is he runs the ball. I mean, he is a dual threat that not even Shedeur Sanders was. And Julian Lewis, now that he can't run, I think Julian is sort of like Shedeur in that Shedeur can run, but he just doesn't. Julian Lewis can run, but if you look at his high school stats, he didn't rush for any yards in high school. I mean, I think it was 50 yards in 3 years that he ran for, and maybe a couple of touchdowns. So he doesn't run. Caden Salters rushed for 2,000 yards in his college career. So he adds that element. I think he's the best man for the job if you want a running offense. I think he's going to take a lot of pressure off the offensive line and off the running backs to where they're going to be able to run the ball better with a Caden Salter at quarterback than with Julian Lewis.
How would it work to work in Julian Lewis, as Dion intimated yesterday? I mean, what would that look like?
Yeah, and I'm not really sure what he was saying with that. I mean, I read it as, because he says that'll be determined as the game, how the game goes. And to me, that says we'd love to get up by a lot of scores and get Julian Lewis in there. Right. You have other people that posted, well, our sources say there's going to be some platooning. Like, I don't see that. I don't know why that makes a lot of sense. I think, it could be one of those things that early in the season, maybe if the first quarter looks bad, if they're sputtering, then maybe Julian Lewis goes out there for a series. Or, I think Lewis has the better arm. If you're on the 30 and there's 20 seconds left in the first half, and you got 70 yards to go, maybe you put Lewis in there to throw a couple of long bombs or something like that. So, but I think this is going to be Caden Salter's team.
Brian Howe, my guest, going to be more difficult for the Buffs to replace Travis Hunter, the receiver, or Travis Hunter, the corner?
The corner, because they're loaded at receiver, and not that there's anybody as good as Travis at receiver, but they are loaded at receiver. And at corner, you've still got some question marks. I mean, DJ McKinney, I think, is a pro, but beyond him, there's a battle for that number 2 cornerback spot. And I think they got 2 or 3 guys they like, but it's certainly not Travis and DJ McKinney. That's 2 pros. You have 1 pro right now. So I think he's going to be harder to replace on the defensive side.
That being said, can Georgia Tech really exploit that on Friday night, or is that something that we see more develop when they get into the Big 12 schedule, how good this secondary is and how it holds up?
Yeah, I think they're going to try. I mean, if I'm Georgia Tech, I would certainly try it, because while the Buffs like a lot of their guys in the secondary, you lost Travis Hunter, Shiloh Sanders, and Cam Silman Craig. I mean, that's kind of the 3 hearts of your defense. If you can have 3 hearts, that's 3 huge guys that are in that secondary. There's a lot of replacement back there. If I'm Georgia Tech, I would try it for sure. I think Haynes King is an underrated quarterback, and has got some weapons out there. They're certainly going to give it a shot. I think I wouldn't expect a lot of passes thrown towards DJ McKinney, but I would pick on that number 2 corner quite a bit.
What does a successful season look like in Boulder this year, in your opinion, Brian?
I think a bowl game. I think if 6-6 and they get to a lower tier bowl, I think that's a huge deal for this program. And, there's some people that won't agree with that. Coach Prime would not agree with that, because, they want to win every game. But you got to be real about what this program is. And the last time they went to bowl games in back-to-back seasons, Gary Barnett was the head coach. I mean, that was 20 years ago. Wow. The last time they did that. So if they can go to a bowl game for a second year in a row, I think that's a success and something that's sustainable for the future. And, look, Julian Lewis, in theory, is your guy next year. And if you're coming off a bowl game and then you hand the reins to Julian Lewis, I think you got something going on with this program here.
In your wildest dreams, or in Buffs fans' wildest dreams, is this team one of those that if you tilt your head and squint your eyes, you could see competing for a spot in the Big 12 title game? Or is that just that even if everything goes right, that's not really in the cards?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, I think that there's some things that could happen. I mean, I think if this offensive line, that we think is better, if they're that much better, I think the offense could be pretty solid. And they think the defense might be better. And if the defense is a little bit better or even as good as last year, then yeah, I think so. And look, last year at this time, we're coming into the year saying, man, the Buffs have got to face each of the top 5 teams in the Big 12 as far as the poll goes. And their schedule is brutal. And 4 of those teams end up not being very good. You look at it right now, it's like, man, they got some really good teams on the schedule. Well, if some of those teams end up not being very good, and CU takes advantage a little bit like they did last year, then yeah, I could see a situation like that. I mean, I think it's so hard to predict any conference and any team in the portal era right now because there's so much change. And so I think that if this team is together and maybe some teams aren't as good as we think, then yeah, I could see a situation. That's a long answer for you, but
Yeah.
I think there's enough talent here. I'll put it that way, to where if a lot of the things fall in place, then yeah, they could be in that race.
The leading rusher for the Colorado Buffaloes this year will be who?
Caden Salter.
Okay. Hey, do you believe in the trio, the quartet of running backs, the way that Dion does? What have you seen from those guys?
Yeah, I think they're solid. I don't think there's a game breaker. I don't think they're going to have 1,000-yard rusher unless it's Caden. I think Caden Salter is probably a 700-800-yard guy, and you got 2 or 3 guys that are in that 400 to 600 range, which actually would be a lot compared to what they've had. Nobody hit 400 yards last year, so maybe I shouldn't say 3 guys can hit 400 to 600, but I think there's a couple guys that can do that. I mean, Dallin Hayden's injured right now, but when he gets back, he's capable of that. DeKalen Taylor's a little bit of a wild card. He ran for almost 1,000 at Incarnate Word last year, but he's a former slot receiver as well. I'm curious to see what he looks like. He's kind of a Dylan Edwards type to me, to where he's going to have some game-breaking runs, but he's not going to be a between the tackles guy and might make some bigger plays as a receiver.
Well, it will be, as we started our conversation, it will be an interesting year in Boulder. Looking forward to it. Friday night against Georgia Tech. Make sure you get all read up before Friday by following Brian's work at buffzone.com, on Twitter at Brian Howell 33. Brian, always appreciate the time. I know you're a busy man. Thanks for taking some time, and enjoy the game on Friday.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. That is Brian Howell of buffzone.com, the best doing it. And he was somebody that has joined this program before Dion got there. And when Dion got there and more demands were on Brian's time, he still was kind enough to join me. I appreciate that. And he does a fantastic job. And I agree. If you listened to the show yesterday, Brian and I are on the same wavelength when it comes to what is a successful season. Because we could talk about, and Dion can talk about depth, right? He can talk about depth, and that's important, and that's great. But the fact of the matter is you're losing certainly the best player in college football, and like Brian said, Shedeur wasn't that far behind. Maybe he was because Travis was such a unicorn, but if you were ranking him, Shedeur wouldn't be that far down the list. And that's ultimately what moves the needle for teams, unless you suffer a ton of injuries. So I think if this team goes to if they're in the conversation in the Big 12 for much of the year, maybe taper off at the end, get to a bowl game, as Dion said, for Miss Peggy, if nothing else, win that bowl game, huge success. And then you turn the keys over to a Julian Lewis, who is probably more talented than Caden Salter, but will now be more mature and more ready to take the reins of the Colorado Buffaloes. And Brian brought up the craziest thing. Julian Lewis is young for a freshman, right? People don't realize how young Julian Lewis truly is. So but this is what Dion has been working for, right? Starts making the splash with Travis and Shedeur and wins enough games. And then meanwhile, they bring in guys from the transfer portal and fortify other spots on this roster. And then they turn it over to a guy like Caden Salter. And then you got Julian Lewis waiting in the wings, and away you go. And that's how you sustain success in a place that, Brian mentioned the Gary Barnett days. Sustained success in Boulder. When's the last time they've had that? So you can see the vision from Deion Sanders. You can see how it might all work. Got to ultimately see it out on the field, and that starts Friday against Georgia Tech. Take your thoughts on the Buffs. We'll talk more CSU Rams tomorrow with Brian Roth, who is the play-by-play man for the Rams. And then my good friend and colleague, Jim Arthur, will join me on Friday to give you more of a preview on Air Force. So we got all of those three teams covered for you as the college football season in earnest kicks off this weekend. On the Instagram feed, Douglas chimed in wanting to hear my thoughts on the Rashee Rice suspension. You don't have to wait much longer, Douglas. I will get into my thoughts on that coming up next here on Extra Sports 1300. The Air Force Falcons are back, and so is the Cadet Wing. Experience college football's best pregame and most unique game day atmosphere Saturday against Bucknell. Kickoff is at 1:30. Get your tickets at aftickets.com. So we have pieced together more of the story when it comes to Rashee Rice over the past couple of weeks. The first part of it was that they were going to have a disciplinary hearing on September 30th, which led conspiracy theorists' minds to run amok. And I don't blame it. That seems silly. Why are you waiting a month into the season to have this hearing? This is not something that just happened with Rashee Rice. Get it done before this season. But we found out why they had to have the arbitration. It was because the NFL was trying to get a double-digit game suspension on Rashee Rice. And the players' union and Rashee Rice's people said there's no precedent for that. And that's true, because you look at Dante Stallworth got suspended for a year for DUI manslaughter, and thankfully, because there is no defending Rashee Rice here. That is not, nobody is going to do that. Okay, but to suspend him, and thankfully nobody was killed. But really, you look at the past history of suspensions, there is no precedent that can be followed when it comes to Rashee Rice. And again, it's the players' union's job. This may not be the player that they love to go to bat for, but it's their job. So the two sides got together, and now it's going to be 6 games. Which, can we really get into a conversation about how fair a 6-game suspension is? I mean, given what Rashee Rice did. I mean, if it was 8 games, if it was a season, I mean, what would be, my question is, what would be fair? This is a criminal act, which he was convicted of, served jail time for. Like, what's the NFL's role here? If you get thrown in jail, do you automatically get banned for a year? And I get it. When they're banning guys for placing bets on FanDuel for a season and they suspend Rashee Rice for 6 games, it looks pretty silly. And I'm right there with you. So, yeah, maybe the NFL, but I think what it ultimately comes down to is just, what they can act on under the CBA, what is allowed. And again, he did a thing in the real world, so to speak, that the real world punished him for. So then what is the responsibility of his employer to do that? I mean, think to your job. If you did the thing, and I know you wouldn't, because that's what I keep bringing up. Like, sometimes you can't relate and you can't put yourself in the position of famous people and famous athletes. In some cases, you can. How many of you have driven as fast and reckless as Rashee Rice has? I would say it's not a large number. I would assume that you have not. I have not. So there's just dumb. And I don't care whether he's rich or famous or what, or young or whatever. Like, I've never done what Rashee Rice has done. But if you did do something like that, would you be fired from your job? Would you take a leave of absence? Like, I'm sure it changes from company to company, but the point I'm getting at is he was punished by the real world for the real world thing that he did. So I don't know if 6 games is fair. I don't know if 8 games or a season, is it going to make it any better? So really, all we're equipped to discuss is the ramifications of his 6-game suspension. It is a good thing that it's done before the season for all parties involved. The idea that they were going to wait a month into the season to do this didn't make any sense. So they do it now. It's 6 games. I think all I'm really equipped to discuss is what the impact will be on Kansas City. And you look at the schedule that they have. And it's not an easy schedule. You play LA in Brazil. You get Philly at home. You get the Giants in New Jersey. Home against Baltimore, at Jacksonville, and home against Detroit. Not an easy schedule. Are the Chiefs? Do the Chiefs have more than 2 losses by the time Rashee Rice comes back? I say they have 2. I think they'll have 2 losses by the time Rashee Rice gets back. They're not losing in Jacksonville. They're not losing in New Jersey. So then you pick 2 out of the 4. Brazil against LA, home against Philly, home against Detroit, home against Baltimore. I think that's kind of where I'm at. I think the Chiefs lose 2 of those games. But the idea that Rashee Rice being suspended means doom for the Kansas City Chiefs, like Patrick Mahomes has gotten by with less. Right? He's thrown to lesser receivers, and now he's got Xavier Worthy, he's got Travis Kelce. Like, I just don't think that this suspension is going to completely derail the first 6 weeks of the Kansas City Chiefs season. But the upside of getting Rashee Rice is certainly there for Kansas City, and we could see Rice help the Chiefs' offense improve. I think that's what I would say, is that Rashee Rice being added to the mix starting in week 7 will improve the Chiefs' offense. But I think really what you're going to see over the first 6 weeks is kind of who Kansas City is. I don't think Rashee Rice not being there makes them terrible, and I don't think Rashee Rice being with the Kansas City Chiefs means they turn into those Chiefs teams of yesteryear when Kelce was in his prime and Tyreek Hill was in his prime. Like, I've just seen people swinging back and forth between Rashee Rice being one of the most important players for the Chiefs and him being a non-entity. And it's probably somewhere in the middle. I think he helps. But I think the Chiefs can certainly navigate those first 6 games well enough without him, and adding him to the mix would be a plus. I think he's a talented receiver. I think that Xavier Worthy is probably better than he is, though. So it's noteworthy that Rashee Rice is suspended for a variety of reasons. But I don't know that this is now if it's Travis Kelce, if it's Chris Jones, Patrick Mahomes, obviously, then we're having a different conversation. But we've seen Patrick Mahomes with a nameless, faceless wide receiving core get by just fine. So being without Rashee Rice isn't going to ruin the first month and a half of the season. But I also don't think that adding him is like adding prime Tyreek Hill back to the mix. It's another guy that maybe you have to worry a little bit about, another guy that Andy Reid can employ and Patrick Mahomes can look his way, but I just don't see Rashee Rice, and I never saw Rashee Rice as any sort of catalyst one way or another for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think what you're going to see the first 6 weeks of the season is going to be very similar to what you see for the remaining 11 that Rashee Rice is available. But yes, getting him does help. Just I don't expect to see a wildly different Kansas City Chiefs team from week 7 on as opposed to week 1 to 6. But with or without Rashee Rice, it's not an easy start to the season for Kansas City. I think they beat LA in Brazil. I think it's easy to say they beat Philadelphia, right? Revenge game at home, all that. New York's just not a very good team. I could definitely see them losing to Baltimore at home, not losing to Jacksonville. And Detroit, you know where I stand with Detroit. And we're going to get into a topic similar to this a little bit later. In fact, we're going to do it in the next segment. I think Detroit is not as good as they were a year ago. Just overall. I don't think you can just lose Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and just keep on chugging along like nothing changed. Now, do I think Detroit's going to be terrible? No. So that's going to be a tough game for Kansas City. But that's where I say, so I would mark Baltimore as the loss, and then I would say they'll lose one of the other 3. In Brazil against LA in the season opener, home against Philly, or home against Detroit. Detroit can beat Kansas City. But I think anything worse than 4-2, and also basing it on, and I guess this is my bigger point. If you think Kansas City through the first 6 weeks is going to have more than 2 losses, it's not about not having Rashee Rice. It's just you don't think Kansas City is as good as they used to be, which is fine. You know, I may disagree with you, but you can certainly have that opinion. But I just don't know that not having Rashee Rice makes you go, oh, well, now everything has changed. No, I don't. If you think Kansas City is going to lose more than 2 games in the first 6 weeks, then Rashee Rice could be healthy or be available, I should say, and you would still have them losing more than 2 games. Take your thoughts, 719-247-1313. Coming up next, coming off of me saying I don't think Detroit is going to be as good as they were a year ago, I have the over-under win totals for every team in the NFL, and they're all kind of grouped 11 and over under 11.5, 10.5, 9.5. So my question is going to be, which of the teams in those groups would you say definitely is going to hit the over or definitely is going to hit the under? We'll do that next here on Extra Sports 1300. Welcome in hour 2 on this Wednesday. Great to have you. Appreciate you tuning in, whether you're simply listening on air online or through the app, or whether you're watching the show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at XTRA Sports 1300. If you are doing that, feel free to follow, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the day's topics. And I think this subject matter that I want to get into here, I think is interesting. I had some fun with some of my coworkers earlier today going through this exercise, and I would like to go through it with you. So the over-under numbers, and this may be the time that if you are someone who likes to bet over-unders, that you're starting to place your wagers now that the preseason is over, the roster cut downs, you've seen all you needed to see, except whether Micah Parsons is going to be on the Dallas Cowboys. But I have a opinion about the Cowboys, even with the uncertainty surrounding Micah Parsons. Where are you going? So I looked at each one of these groupings, and it's like over under 11.5, 10.5, 9.5, 8, 7.5, 6.5, 5.5, 4.5, right? So I said, looked in these groups and said, which one, if I told you had to make a bet on the over for a team or the under for a team, which one would you do out of these groups? So I'll run through them here. For instance, the over under 11.5 group, the elite of the elite. In the sportsbook's minds, it's Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, and Philly. That's their over under numbers. The one team in there that I would be most confident in placing an over bet on would be Buffalo. Buffalo has 2 somewhat tricky games in the first, I think, 10 weeks of the season, Baltimore and Kansas City, and they get them both at home. And I've said the road to the Super Bowl is going to go through Buffalo. They're going to be the number 1 seed. They have a weaker division than Baltimore. The other, and I won't include Houston because I don't quite look at them the same way I do Kansas City, Baltimore, and Buffalo. But when it comes to Kansas City and the Ravens, they have a more difficult time in their own division than Buffalo does. And the fact that they get their marquee matchups at home, I would be the most confident in them going over, placing the over bet on Buffalo. And if I had to pick a team that I would, if I had to bet on one to go under, it would be Philadelphia. And I'm not down on Philadelphia by any stretch of the imagination, but you can see why. If I told you, hey, Philly's the team that's going to go under 11.5 wins, I actually don't think any of these teams are going under 11.5 wins, but let's say one does, because that's the fun of it. You could see why it'd be Philly, right? Super Bowl hangover. They didn't look like a juggernaut for much of last season, right? Until really Saquon Barkley got going. I think that the division is going to be better, right? Dallas is going to be better than they were a year ago. They have Dak Prescott back, and say what you will about Dak, but he wins regular season games. Maybe not against Philadelphia, because that would be characterized as a big game. But then you have the Giants, who I think are kind of plucky. They got a really good front 4 on defense. So, like, there are some things here, the target being on their back, the Super Bowl hangover, the division being the way it is. You know, the Commanders are still a very good team. The NFC East plays the AFC West. as well. So look at the out-of-division schedule and the out-of-conference schedule that a team like Philadelphia will play. They play Denver. They play Kansas City. They play LA. They play Vegas. And the AFC West is arguably the best division in football. So if I had to take one of these teams to go under 11.5 wins out of Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, and Philly, I would take Philly. Buffalo would be the over bet. Philly would be the under bet. Next group, 10.5 wins. There's only two in this group. It's Detroit and it's San Francisco. And if you were listening in the last segment, you know where I'm going with this. And if you've been listening to this program for the last few weeks, you know I'll be going. I would take the 49ers. Yes, I would. It would be with the idea that Christian McCaffrey plays in many more games than he doesn't. And their argument is right there if you wanted to go against San Francisco and say they would be the team that would go under, right? Oh, Christian McCaffrey could get hurt again. So I could see it both ways. I'm going to take the Niners and say that Christian McCaffrey will be healthy and they'll go over the 10.5 wins. And I'll take Detroit as the more likely team to go under the 10.5 wins. Losing Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. Again, ask Philadelphia how that goes. Again, I think both will probably go over. But I could see Detroit at 10. So I would bet the over on San Francisco, the under on Detroit. Now to is Cincinnati, Denver, Green Bay, Houston, both LA teams, Tampa, and Washington. If you had to take one team out of that group that you would bet the over 9.5 wins on, who would it be? For me, it would be Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay is a sneaky Super Bowl team. They are certainly in a division where they could just pummel the three teams that they have competing with them. So I think I would be most confident in Tampa going over that 9.5 number than anybody else. I think Green Bay, Houston, Cincinnati could all do it as well. But I would be most confident in Tampa. And if I had to take one team to go under the 9.5, you would think I would go Denver. They were in consideration. And I have had this team tabbed at 9 wins. But 9 is very close. You know, a block kick or last second Hail Mary or something, and all of a sudden they're 10 and they're hitting the over. I think the team that I would make the under bet on would be Washington. Right? A lot of reasons why they are a prime regression candidate. Second year quarterback, division getting better. They won a lot of one-score games last year. So I would say out of that group, Washington could be that. But how about LA? What is the status of Matthew Stafford? If Matthew Stafford is hurt, they're the ones to take. But if Matthew Stafford is ruled out for any amount of time, that number is going to plummet. So you're not going to get 9.5 on the Matthew Stafford less Rams. What you would be betting on is that Matthew Stafford at some point is going to re-aggravate this injury. He's going to miss time and maybe miss a lot of the season, and then they would be obviously that team. If I'm assuming health, I would take Washington. But with what's hanging over Matthew Stafford and all of this shroud of secrecy that's going on with the LA Rams, I think the Rams would be that as well. Then we have the 8.5. Now we're getting to the teams without very high expectations this year, right? The 8.5 over/under win crowd: Arizona, Chicago, Dallas, Minnesota, New England, Pittsburgh, and Seattle. The team that I would take to go over 8.5 wins, the Dallas Cowboys. In an 8-year career, Dak Prescott has won 8 or fewer games twice. We are talking about the regular season, and we're not even talking about the quality of the wins. We are merely talking about the quantity. And that's part of the Dallas Cowboys experience. Now, we don't get duped by it anymore, but there have been times where the Dallas Cowboys have won 12, 13 games, and it's like, whoa, are the Dallas Cowboys ready to compete for a Super Bowl? No. But they do win games during the regular season. They absolutely do that. So the team that I would be most confident in going over 8.5 wins would be the Dallas Cowboys. The team that I would be the least confident in going over 8.5 wins would be the Arizona Cardinals. It gets to a point where you're just like, not everyone can be good. And Arizona, yes, they have made some strides. They have made improvements. But if Stafford is healthy and Christian McCaffrey is healthy and people like the Seattle Seahawks, where are the wins going to come from? Right? It becomes a numbers game and the math doesn't math. So to me, somebody has to be the best 7-10 football team in the NFL, and it might be Arizona. I don't think they're a bad football team, but I like LA if Stafford is healthy. I like San Francisco to bounce back. Even if Christian McCaffrey isn't healthy, I think that San Francisco is going to win more games than they did a year ago. And I think Seattle's defense is really good. Ultimately, you have to it's like when we do the thing where we go through every team's schedule, it's win-loss, and we got like 3 different records. Like a third of the league is 13-4, and another half of the league is 4-13, and it's like it doesn't work that way. There will be a team that will lose, that won't win as much as maybe their talent says they will. And when I look at that 8.5 win group, I think Chicago, there's a very good chance it could be Chicago, but I'll back Arizona on the under 8.5 wins. 4 teams in the 7.5 over/under win group: Atlanta, Indy, Jacksonville, and Miami. The team that I think is most likely to go over the 7.5 number is Jacksonville. Bring in Liam Cohen to coach up Trevor Lawrence. I'm not out on Trevor Lawrence yet. They get Travis Hunter. Do I agree with the way Liam Cohen is initially employing him? Not particularly, but I know that Travis Hunter can make an impact on either side of the football. Their defense is not good, but neither is their division. I think of that group, Jacksonville is the most likely to go over 7.5. The team that is most likely to go under 7.5, if Anthony Richardson were starting for the Indianapolis Colts, I would pick the Colts. Because when you get down to this level, you're looking at what teams do you think that the bottom could completely fall out. And if Indianapolis were starting Anthony Richardson, they could be that team, which is precisely why Shane Steichen isn't starting Anthony Richardson and he's starting Daniel Jones instead. So I think that Indy can hold things together a little bit better than maybe some people think. People think because Daniel Jones is starting, they're going to win 4 games. No, they might. I mean, if they win 6 or 7, they're not a good football team. But with Anthony Richardson, there's a chance that the bottom could completely fall out. And we're theorizing how cool it would be for Peyton Manning's nephew to play for the team that Peyton used to play for. The team of this group that I think is most likely to have the bottom fall out is Miami. And I don't know about you. Did you hear Mike McDaniel on the Dan Patrick Show this morning? Like, it was a cool story that he brought up about going to Broncos camp. But, like, he sounded like kind of despondent, kind of out of it. And I know that's kind of his whole shtick, but it's funny. When he was winning games, it's endearing, and it's just, I don't remember the comedian it was. Maybe it was a George Carlin thing. But, like, if you have the difference between eccentric and crazy, if you have money, you're eccentric. If you are poor, then you're just a crazy person. It's like Mike McDaniel. When Mike McDaniel is winning, then he's this cool, eccentric, kind of aloof, like it all works. And then when he's a guy that's kind of on the hot seat, and there's a lot of questions about his football team, and he presents himself in the same way. And I'm not expecting Mike McDaniel to be different. I'm not asking for him to be different. But that whole shtick, it's like it's not as endearing. And you're like, he sounds kind of like out of it. That's how he sounded this morning on the Dan Patrick Show. I like Mike McDaniel, and I like Tua, and I hope that the bottom doesn't fall out in Miami, but I just, every day that goes by, I'm like, it might. So I would take the under on Miami. The 6.5 crowd, now we're really getting, I actually think the 6.5 group has one of the easiest over bets in the NFL. There are 2 teams in that group. It's Carolina and it's Vegas. I think one of the best over bets in all the land this year is Vegas. I don't think particularly highly of Vegas. I don't think that they're going to be anything more than the 4th place team in the AFC West, but the AFC West is really, and they're going to be one of those teams where you're like, if they were in this division, how would things go for them? If they were in the AFC South, would they be able to compete with Houston? If they were in the NFC South, would they be able to compete? I think they're going to be that team. They're going to be the best last place team in the National Football League. And they're going to win more than 6 games. And it's going to infuriate you if you're a fan of a team in the AFC West. Because Vegas isn't going anywhere. They're not threatening for anything. But they're going to be annoying enough to pick a win from Kansas City or Denver or LA. And it just might be the game that you need to win a division, get a wild card. Like, Las Vegas is going to bother people. The Raiders are going to bother people. And in that way, they're kind of back, aren't they? They're just going to be good enough to be a thorn in other teams' sides. Not to be a playoff team, but they're winning more than 6 games. because they have made their everything that I just said about the Raiders, that is purposeful. That is who they are trying to be. They're not trying to beat the Chiefs in the division. They're not trying to be they're not seriously thinking they're a playoff team, but they just don't want to be terrible. They're tired of being terrible. They're tired of being a punchline. And now they have grown-ups in the room. They have a grown-up at quarterback. They got a grown-up as a head coach. And you saw what that did for the Broncos, even with Sean Payton hating Russell Wilson. It was still competent football that was being played. That's what you're going to see from the Raiders. And you know they're going to make Ashton Genty a thing. They didn't draft him that high for nothing. They're going to play ball control offense. Max Crosby's going to get after people. They're going to be well coached. I think they might be the best over bet in the entire NFL. And that leaves Carolina, obviously, as the team that would go under. If you told me that one goes over, one goes under. Then you get to 5.5. These are really bad teams. The Fighting Spencer Rattlers, both New York teams, and Tennessee. The team that I would be most confident in going over would be the Jets. I could see the argument for Tennessee. We saw what Bo Nix did for the Broncos. We saw what Jaden Daniels did for the Commanders, especially what happened in Washington, right? Not that Cam Ward is as good as Jaden Daniels, but even if you like Jaden Daniels, there weren't a lot of people backing the Commanders. So could Cam Ward lift up the Tennessee Titans to get 6 wins or 7 wins? I could see it, but I'll take the Jets because I think that the Jets outside of Buffalo or in a division, any one of those 3 teams are not great by any stretch of the imagination. New England, Miami, New York. But whatever happened to the Jets are super talented? Like, wasn't that the conversation? Weren't they one of those they're just a quarterback away teams? Oh, they got Sauce Gardner and they got Garrett Wilson and they got this guy and that guy. Whatever happened to that? Because you could be a team that still doesn't have a quarterback and win 6 games. I think people feel so burned by jumping on the bandwagon when Aaron Rodgers showed up in the Jets. Like now they won't even acknowledge that the Jets do have talent at a lot of different positions. I think the Jets could win 6 or more games. Now, how many more than 6? Not many more. But the Giants' schedule is so brutal. That division is good. New Orleans is awful. New Orleans is the team that I would take to go under. Why they didn't start Tyler Shuck, I don't understand it. You draft Tyler Shuck in the second round and you don't start at 25 years old, you don't start him. You watch both of those guys on Saturday. Was there a discernible difference? I didn't see one. Why not just start Tyler Shuck? I don't quite get that, but it's going to be a rough first year for Kellen Moore. They would be the team I would take to hit the under. And then that leaves just Cleveland. And I looked at it, and I know Cleveland, the start of their schedule is rough. But there are some teams on the schedule for the Browns that I don't believe in. This is not hey, the Browns are going to be better than everyone thinks they are. But look at some of the teams later in their schedule. I think Cleveland's winning 5 games. I mean, you got Myles Garrett. He can't wreck you a game. Joe Flacco can't win you 1 game early in the season. Like, we're not setting a high bar here. The Browns are not going to be good, but can they get 5 wins? Yeah, I think they can. I think they can go over 4.5. That's why I would go with Cleveland. Take your thoughts on those over-unders, 719-247-1313. Our athlete of the week is back with the help of our friends at Blackjack Pizza. I would invite you to go to our website, extrasports1300.com, submit a nomination for an outstanding prep athlete in Southern Colorado. Then come Monday, I will give you the finalists, and you will vote all next week. Tell your friends, your family, and then the leading vote getter will join me on this show a week from Friday. And we'll just keep doing that throughout the entire 25-26 high school sports season. So submit your nominations, extrasports1300.com. And big thanks to our friends at Blackjack Pizza for supporting this and also supporting prep athletes in our area. Once in a while, I play a lot of audio on this show. There are a lot of quotes. And it's just the business that I'm in. But every once in a while, there is a quote that just, they're like, whoa. The stuff I played from Sean Payton earlier, I don't go, whoa. I go, all right, not everything has to be story time with Sean Payton. But once in a while, someone will say something and you go, whoa. We have the quote of the millennium, courtesy of Eli and Peyton's nephew.
I mean, I think that's all of us at Texas, and I think we kind of try to shift the narrative. We're going for everyone else. Target's not on our back. We have the red dot on everyone else.
What? The target is not on our back. We're putting the red dot on everyone else. I mean, you want to know a guy who grew up in a family that knows what to say to the media? Arch Manning grew up in a family that knows what to say to the media. Peyton, Eli, very polished, and they always seem to say the right things. But this is like, it's well polished, but it's also more bravado, perhaps, than Eli or Peyton ever showed during their career. Although, should we really be looking at that because he's Cooper's son? You know, some people kind of forget that every once in a while. He's not Eli's son. He's not Peyton's son. He's Cooper's son. And Cooper's a different cat. So maybe that's where it comes in. He has well-trained, a grandfather, but also uncles who have gone through it. You know, they played that media game. They know what to say. And then he has a dad who is adjacent to all of that, but he's also kind of more of a free spirit, not as buttoned up maybe as Peyton and Eli are. And you get that together, and then you get like the coldest quote I have heard from an athlete in a very long time. Like that's something that, I mean, I could imagine like Kobe Bryant with it. You want to see your Mamba? That's Mamba mentality. Target's not on our back. The red dot's on everyone else's. But it's absolutely what you want to hear. Because Arch Manning on Saturday afternoon is the most anticipated, I don't want to say debut, but like the most anticipated quarterback taking center stage for the first time. That doesn't quite roll off the tongue like debut. Unveiling that I can remember in college football. I can't remember, and there was a much anticipated debut, if you will, here in Colorado just a couple years ago with Shedeur. Arch Manning is like 5 times that. And given all the hype that is around Texas, they're the number 1 team in America. Arch Manning everybody is just begging him to leave. We barely seen this guy play football at the collegiate level yet. And just the mere notion that he's not going to come out has Saints fans, has Browns fans just like weeping because they want so desperately for Arch to be available for them when they pick at the top of the draft this year. We don't even know if this guy can truly play. I mean, he's looked good, but he's looked good against, with all due respect, CSU. And CSU is not an SEC level team. Like we've seen Arch in these, and I think it's actually grown the hype because Sark has been very deliberate on when to play him. And he's come in games that are already well decided. So with Quinn Ewers, there was a huge advantage. And now you drop Arch in a game that is a laugher, and then he just continues it, and everyone's going, whoa, look at what Arch Manning can do. But the legend has grown because of the little cameos we've seen from Arch Manning. But it's the program he plays for, it's his last name, and it's also where that team has been placed at the very top. And we get the number 1 team in the country against the defending national champions. Arch Manning isn't making, by all intents and purposes, his debut, his grand entrance against Abilene Christian. He's making it against the defending national champions. And I know that this Ohio State team is not last year's Ohio State team. Right? And that has to be known going in. Ohio State is not in a prime position to repeat as national champion. But I promise you, if Arch Manning, with everything already going on, with that quote, if he goes out on Saturday and plays well against the team that is the reigning national champions, there's no telling where this is going to go for Arch Manning. But here's the other side of it. If he struggles, which is, there is a non-zero chance that Arch Manning struggles a little bit in his first extended playing time at the Division I level on a national stage against the reigning national champions. Like, he could struggle. And it doesn't mean that he's terrible, and it doesn't mean that from game 2 on he's not brilliant. But he could be a little lackluster in this first start. And because of that quote, he will be buried. And you don't think he knows that? That's what makes that quote so much better, is that Arch Manning, it's not just, if Quinn Ewers were to say this, be a pretty good line. When Arch Manning says that, it hits different. And it's Arch Manning fully understanding all the pressure that is on him, the weight that he carries on his shoulders, all the attention he's getting, all the eyeballs on him. He knows all of that stuff. He's acutely aware of it. And yet he still says something like that, quite defiant. Saturday is going to be awesome. Can't wait. I don't know how it's going to go because I don't know if Arch Manning is any good. Like, it's the same thing. Like, I don't know if Bryce Underwood's going to be any good at Michigan. I don't know if Julian Lewis is going to be any good at CU. How many guys have been highly touted coming out of high school and have not been able to get it going at the collegiate level? It happens all the time. Or I should say, we don't know for sure. I think Arch Manning's going to be very good. I think Julian Lewis is going to be very good for CU when he's ready. And I think Bryce Underwood is going to have some moments this year for Michigan. But you don't quite know. Not 100%. And that's what makes Saturday all the more interesting. And Arch Manning's like, you are already very much looking forward to this game. Here's this. Saturday, as they say, it's going to be theater. 719-247-1313. Back after this. Saturday night, Switchbacks FC taking on the best team in the West, FC Tulsa, in a must-see match at Widener Field. It's Cyan night, so wear your Cyan gear and bring the energy as the Switchbacks fight for 3 points on home turf. Kickoff is at 7. Seats going fast. Get yours at switchbacksfc.com. Let's hit the text line here. I started the show by discussing, I get it. The Broncos are in a better spot. Guys want to play for Sean Payton. Let's not go crazy about that the Broncos are hoarding every decent player in the NFL, and that's the way it sounds if you read some of the reports and listen to Sean Payton talk. And I get it. He's got to sell his program. But I'm just not going to look at Sam Ehlinger deciding he wants to be QB3 in Denver as opposed to QB3 somewhere else as some ringing endorsement and rebuke of every other NFL team. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why you would want to pay for Sean Payton if you're a quarterback, but it's not like Ehlinger turned down a chance to start to be the third guy in Denver. He was going to be the third guy anywhere else he went. He's comfortable in Denver. Denver's a great place to live. Colorado, we all love it. Good quarterback coach. Yeah, good for Sean Payton. But let's not act like teams are crying in their pillow at night because they lost out on a chance at Sam Ehlinger. This coming from the 719. Ask a fan of any other team outside the AFC West to name a player other than Bo Nix on the Broncos offense. I bet the average fan couldn't name one. Adds he could have drafted Nix in the second round. Sean Payton was ridiculous. Nobody believes in Sean Payton more than Sean Payton. I'll say that. And look, he's got a Super Bowl ring. There's not many other coaches in the NFL. I'm not saying that some of this isn't deserved or warranted. But your point there, the texter's point about the Broncos offense is exactly the way Sean Payton wants it. You're going to know whoever plays quarterback for him. That's just a given. You can name every starting quarterback in the NFL right now without skipping a beat. It's just something that we know. But everyone else, he wants nameless, faceless offensive players, especially at the skill positions, because it's like, I'm going to utilize you the way I see fit. The field is my chessboard. And you're all chess pieces. I got a couple of rooks, I got a couple of knights, I got a bunch of pawns. And I'm gonna move them how I want to, but you're not going to be able to just discern between any of them. That's the way that Sean Payton wants it. And it's worked thus far. And that's the thing. Tom texting you and you sound bitter that the Broncos are the deepest team in the NFL. I don't sound I'm not bitter. In fact, I've given them credit for being one of the deeper teams in the NFL. Good on them. Not bitter at all. I'm just saying some of this stuff, it's starting to add up. Some of this talk, this bravado, all this stuff is starting to add up, and there will come a point where maybe Sean Payton will not be able to quite deliver on some of this stuff. But this has been an offseason of unmitigated, unbridled, runaway hype, to the point that now the fifth inside linebacker is the best fifth inside linebacker in the history of the NFL. It's getting a bit much. That's all I'm saying. Getting a bit much. Want to get to this too from SoCal Dave on Brady. So they're going to allow Tom Brady to be in on production meetings with head coaches. He says, I have such a tremendously huge problem with this. Pick being an owner or broadcaster, not both, especially when he would have inside information to share with his team, and we all know he would. Let's not forget what organization Tom Brady is from. I'm not accusing Tom Brady of anything. Okay? Not going to do it. I understand why some people will bring up the fact that he was part of Bill Belichick's New England Patriots. I'm not doing that. I mean, I did because I just want to clarify with SoCal. I'm not saying Tom Brady is going to go back to the Raiders and share anything. But here's my thing about it. Look at it this way. We know that NFL head coaches are a paranoid bunch. Football coaches, coaches in general, very paranoid bunch. So Tom Brady's job as a broadcaster is to bring you the best broadcast he can. And part of that is the insider information. Again, he's not going to share anything on air that any coach tells him, don't say this on air. But the point is that Tom Brady is going to go in there, and how many coaches are going to go like, yeah, I'm not. Like with other broadcasters, maybe I'll be a little bit more I'm not doing that. Because they're paranoid. But you have to understand that. And there comes a point where you're like, Brady is great. Right? He was a great player, and it's brand recognition, and it brings attention to your broadcast. But at a certain point, he's got to be just good at what he does. And I wonder if teams and head coaches are going to be interested in sharing as much information with Tom Brady as they would other broadcasters. And if they don't, then in some way the Fox broadcast suffers. This is not about hating Brady and he's not allowed to do everything. You know, date Sydney Sweeney, be an owner, do a lot of different things. I'm not anti-Tom Brady. I like Tom Brady. But there are certain, to Dave's point, there are certain jobs that clash a little bit. And certain jobs that you can lose credibility in some way because of another job you may have. I mean, how is Tom Brady going to talk about teams that go against the Raiders? And even the thought, like, I don't really want to accuse Tom Brady of anything, right? And say that he's going to intentionally do this or be biased or anything like that. But people are going to think it. And isn't that enough to affect the quality of the product? That people are tuning in and saying, I don't know if I can take Tom Brady seriously because he's calling a Denver Broncos game and he's the owner of the Raiders. You think it's bad? Like people, joke about Chris Collinsworth all the time, right? How biased he is. What bias does he have towards Patrick Mahomes? He didn't play for the Chiefs. He's not related to Mahomes. He just likes the guy. But yet he's biased. And now you have a guy that actually you could make the argument has a bias built in. I'm with you. Like, I don't even want to go down the road of anything untoward going on. But the fact that so many people would just think it, you have to ask yourself, if you're Fox, you got to weigh this and say, is it really worth it? I appreciate that text, Dave, because I think you make a good point. That'll do it. Got jet a little bit early. Be back tomorrow at 3. If you missed the first hour, it's coming up right now again here on Extra Sports 1300.